This is the Daler-Rowney Stay Wet palette for acrylic painting, and it's a fabulous idea because it's one way of keeping your acrylics wet and usable. And inside your box you're going to find a plastic lid, which I'll show you how I use later on. But also inside there's going to be some parchment paper, which is this very thin, almost like greaseproof paper, and also some paper that we're going to use almost like blotting paper. And so what you do is you put your reservoir paper into the big area and just pour a little water over it and soak it all over. I find if I have too much water in there, I tend to tilt it out. So I'm just going to tilt the reservoir around until all the reservoir paper is completely wet, and just straighten it a little bit like that. And then what you do is you put your parchment paper on top, and the idea behind this is really quite ingenious. It's all about evaporation and osmosis. So when you put your acrylic paints on the parchment paper, the water underneath is going to slowly evaporate and keep the paints wetter longer. And it's quite terrific to use, especially if you're working at a table, because you don't want your paints to dry out too quickly. I tend to keep my brushes and my paints in this little area over here. And when I come to actually paint with them, I pull the colour away and mix them together, and then start painting whatever it is that I'm interested in painting. In this case, it's going to be some trees, like that. And I'm not worried about the paint evaporating and drying, because of course the evaporation is slowing down due to the reservoir and the evaporation of the water. So that's going to slow down the drying process tremendously. When I've finished painting, of course you always rinse your brush very well, but what you can do now is store your paints overnight in the Stay Wet palette, and all that you need to do is just put the lid back on, make sure it's quite firmly closed, and I quite frankly quite often put it back in its box and leave it overnight like that, and the next morning your paints are still nice and wet and quite easy to use. In fact, I've left them overnight for 2 nights in a row and still been able to use the paints. So it does definitely slow down the drying time for acrylic painting.